There are perhaps no opposites in life greater than getting hired for a job and getting fired from that job, especially if it's a job that you really want. When you get hired, it's the start of a new beginning. It's the start of a brand new chapter in your life. When you get fired, it's the end of that chapter, as the book is closed on that employment opportunity. When you get hired, you're getting paid a salary with a chance to increase that salary and climb the ladder. When you get fired, you no longer get a salary, and you have no idea what your next salary or your next opportunity is going to be. When you get hired, you have a chance to make a name for yourself. When you get fired, that chance is gone. And when it comes specifically to playing in the National Football League, when you get hired, you're playing in front of crowded stadiums, you're achieving your dream of playing at the highest level in a sport that you played your whole life, and you're dreaming of a chance to be one of the greats, to be idolized by fans around the world, and to compete for one of the greatest prizes in all of sports. When you get fired, you might never be playing that sport again, and you'll be going to a 9-to-5 job, forgotten and fading into obscurity with few remembering your name. So what if you manage to do that cycle in a span of one whole day? Seriously, what happens if you manage to get hired and then fired in the span of 24 hours? Well, this man right here is Atlanta Falcons running back and kick returner Sylvester Stamps. And in 1985, that's exactly what happened during one of the most bizarre days by any player in NFL history, where he started the day leaving his regular job in order to play professional football, and ended the day off the roster and being cut, going back to his original job. We've seen guys get signed for a weekend or a couple of days, but for not even 24 hours? For you to take a long flight halfway around the world, start the flight with Sylvester Stamps being off an NFL roster, and end the flight with Sylvester Stamps being off an NFL roster, all while not even knowing that he was on a team? This deserves a deep dive 40 years later. Because if anything summed up just how messy the Falcons were back in the mid-80s, it was this incident right here. Because this is the story behind Sylvester Stamps, and what might just be, considering the circumstances, one of the craziest careers in NFL history, featuring the guy who got hired and then subsequently fired in the span of 24 hours. Make sure you hit that like button down below, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss a single video that we post on the channel. We post every single day on here about the weird and the wacky history of the NFL with stories like this one that you might not have heard of before. So if you like that sort of stuff and want to join this community of football lovers and sports historians, then this is the place for you. Thanks in advance for liking and subscribing and joining the community. And with that in mind, let's talk about the time that Sylvester Stamps did anything but leave his stamp on the Falcons. Before I talk about the actual incident in question, we need some context to understand just who Sylvester Stamps was, and how his career was going in the first place. The year is 1985, and there is a running back out of Jackson State who's trying to make it onto the team by the name of Sylvester Stamps. Stamps was on the Falcons in 1984, and while he didn't play a ton on offense, he did return quite a few kicks, leading the team in kick returns and kick return yards. However, that's not to say that head coach Dan Henning was necessarily impressed by him, as Stamps had some issues. The good news was that he was super fast. The bad news was that he was undersized, and that left him prone to fumbling a lot. On 26 touches during the 1984 season, he fumbled twice. I don't need to tell you that when you fumble once every 13 times you touch the ball, your coach is going to be pretty frustrated with you. That's not good. Heading into the 1985 season, Stamps had an uphill climb to make it onto the roster. As head coach Dan Henning said, especially after Stamps fumbled during one practice ever getting hit, we want to see if Sylvester Stamps can run the ball in this league without turning the ball over. He's a little man in a big man's game. And it was super frustrating for Stamps, because even though the man had undeniable speed and could make magic happen with the ball in his hands, holding on to the ball for this man right here was just too much at times. He mishandled 2 kicks in another preseason game, had some ball security issues, and when it was time for the Falcons to trim the roster down before the start of the season, Stamps was one of the last guys cut. The juice just wasn't worth the squeeze. As electric and as explosive as the man could be in the open field, the fumbling issue was just too much to overcome. With that, it seemed like Sylvester Stamps was done in the NFL, at least for the 1985 season. Maybe he'd come back and try again in 1986, but he was going to go back to Mississippi, where he would get a job as a fireman. From leading the Falcons in kick returns and kick return yardage in 1984 to not being on an NFL team in 1985. It's the harsh reality of this ever-changing business, and how nothing is guaranteed from year to year. However, this wouldn't be the last time that we heard of Sylvester Stamps. Like I said, the man could return kicks. During the 1984 season, amongst all players to have at least 19 kick returns, Stamps had the 4th highest average in the league in yards per return, trailing only Bobby Humphrey of the New York Jets, Dokie Williams of the Los Angeles Raiders, and Larry Anderson of the Indianapolis Colts. The man couldn't hold on to the ball, but it's not like the man couldn't play. And if there was an injury that occurred, you better believe that the Falcons were going to consider bringing Stamps back into the fold. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. On December 4th, 1985, the Falcons were practicing in anticipation for their interconference battle against the Kansas City Chiefs. Already, this season was a train wreck for the Falcons, who sat at 2-11, who looked like one of the worst teams in the NFL and one of the worst teams in franchise history, and who looked like this was the end of the Steve Bartkowski era. And it was about to get a heck of a lot worse when during this Wednesday practice, running back and primary kick returner Cliff Austin was placed on injured reserve with a sprained ankle. Austin had his moments with the Falcons in 1985, including a kick return touchdown during one of their 2 wins thus far, a 31-24 victory in Week 7 over the New Orleans Saints. But now, with him looking like he was going to be out for the season, and with the Falcons needing a kick returner for their final 3 games, they looked to a familiar man for help. As you probably guessed, they looked to this man right here, Sylvester Stamps. And after Stamps had a successful tryout, the Falcons decided to bring Stamps back. On December 6, 1985, Sylvester Stamps was back in the NFL. He had left his job as a firefighter in his hometown of Vicksburg, and was now back with the Atlanta Falcons, ready to make the most of his second chance. Except, on December 6th, the day that he signed, something else happened. That something? That was an injury by their starting safety, Scott Case. Case was the team's 2nd-round pick during the 1984 NFL Draft, and he had an incredibly solid career in the NFL, establishing himself as one of the greatest defensive backs in franchise history. Case would go on to play 11 seasons in Atlanta, and a few years later, in 1988, he would make it to the Pro Bowl after leading the league with 10 interceptions. In fact, by the time Case left the Falcons, he ranked 3rd all-time in franchise history in interceptions, with only Roland Lawrence and Ray Brown ranking above him. Today, he ranks 4th. But the previous week, in a 34-24 loss to the Los Angeles Raiders, Case, who started the game, suffered a knee injury, which turned out to be a sprained knee. There was doubt about whether or not he'd be able to play for the game against the Chiefs, and after his knee was drained of fluid, it was clear that he was not going to be able to suit up. It wasn't worth it whatsoever. The season's over, Case is too valuable, and he doesn't have the mobility to roam around. So at this point, the Falcons had a problem. They lost their kick returner, Cliff Austin, and they lost their starting safety, Scott Case. It's a heck of a lot easier to replace a kick returner than it is to replace a safety. Kick returners are out there only a handful of plays a game, and back in 1985, you could easily work around not having 2 kick returners by having just one guy line up back there. Plus, even if you wanted to still have 2 kick returners, If you've ever watched teams warm up 90 minutes before the game starts, you see a bunch of guys fielding kicks and punts. It doesn't take a lot of skill, relatively speaking, to just catch a ball and take a knee, or to let it go into the end zone and take it at the 20-yard line, since that's where touchbacks came out back in 1985. But replacing a safety? That's a much taller order. They're on the field more often. They're way more important to the game. And there's much more involved in playing safety than playing kick returner. Going into a game without a decent amount of kick returners can definitely be worked around. Going into a game without a decent amount of safeties can be an absolute nightmare. And because the Falcons found out the day that Stamps got re-signed that they now also needed a safety with Scott Case out, I think you can see where this one's going. Because not even 24 hours after Sylvester Stamps got signed by the Falcons and got his second chance, he was released. So much for that. Stamps sort of understood the situation, saying, "I guess it couldn't be helped." Stamps' NFL career was put on hold not even 24 hours after it started up again. General Manager Tom Bratz tried to have a sense of humor about the whole situation, saying, "It's a record." But is that really an appropriate comment to make? You almost seem proud of the fact that you signed a guy and then cut him on the same day. You almost seem proud of the fact that you did this, made someone quit their job as a firefighter, and then released him from his job. If Stamps was the one saying that, okay, using humor as a coping mechanism and looking at the funny side of things is fine. But not you as the employer. If I got hired by a company and then got fired immediately after for something that was completely out of my control and seemed like a gross oversight on the part of the company, especially after I relocated to join that company, the last thing I want my boss to do is poke fun at the situation and poke fun at my misfortune. But I digress. Bottom line, this man right here that you've been watching this entire time, Sylvester Stamps, was out of an NFL job not even 24 hours after getting one. And when the Falcons lost 38-10 to the Chiefs to drop to 2-12, Sylvester Stamps was not a part of it at all. However, there is somewhat of a happy ending with this, because a few days after the Chiefs game, the Falcons decided to re-sign Sylvester Stamps. This time, it was legit. And at that point, Stamps would have a pretty solid career in football, all things considered. To be an undrafted free agent and make it into the NFL is impressive by itself. But to play in the NFL all the way until 1989 and have a career that's way longer than the average player, that's really good. In fact, Stamps led the entire NFL amongst all qualified kick returners during the 1987 season in yards per return average, and he scored a couple of touchdowns, most notably finding the end zone at a 10-10 tie during the 1986 season against the San Francisco 49ers. Stamps never played on any team that was any good, and never played on a team that had a winning record or made it to the playoffs. But the fact that he was able to play on an NFL roster in some capacity for the remainder of the 1980s, seeing as in 1985, he was not on a team to start the year off, and he had a stretch where he was signed and cut in the quickest time imaginable, is awfully impressive. Today, you probably aren't going to be seeing anything like this. Maybe you'll see a player get signed for the weekend and then cut, but there's two things with that. Number one, most of the time, it's just going from the practice squad to the active roster and then back down to the practice squad. So they'll still have a job. And number two, that player will be signed for more than 24 hours. Maybe they get signed Saturday for the game and then released on Monday. We saw that a lot with CJ Spiller with the Kansas City Chiefs a few years ago. But at least for more than 24 hours, they've got some sense of job security. To be signed and then to be cut immediately after without any wrongdoing on your end, like insubordination or a failed medical or a failed drug test, all without playing in a game, that's bizarre. And that's the mismanagement of the mid-80s Falcons for you. Because in 1985, Sylvester Stamps put his stamp on the NFL by having what might just be the quickest stint in league history. Be sure to like and subscribe if you have not done so already, as it helps the channel out a lot, and check out my other channels, JG8 for the history of college football, JG7 for the history of baseball, and JG9 News, where we talk about all things happening in the NFL. Join me every Wednesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern, where we'll play live NFL trivia for cash prizes. And make sure to join me live, as we're on stream just about every single day. And thanks to all our Patreon members and our YouTube members for helping out the channel. See how you become a member and show your support financially in the description down below.